to the Wine Tech Insiders podcast. Today, we have a whole new type of podcast. We're doing a deep dive into NFTs, and we have Simon Farr, our expert, who's going to answer a bunch of questions, give us a lot more insight. And along with Simon, we have our full slate of Wine Tech Insiders back. We have Nick from Wine Owners, Laurie from Oushinery, Seb from Troly, and Jonathan from Bottlebooks.
Hi, everyone.
Hey. Sorry, I just only gave Jonathan a chance to say hi there. But, you'll see everybody in a second if you're watching this on YouTube. If not, you'll hear from everyone soon. But first, we want to hear from Simon. Simon, just tell us about yourself and what you're doing in NFTs.
Okay. Well, I started in wine nearly 50 years ago, amazingly enough, in Bordeaux, working in an unknown chateau, which is still unknown, probably due to my efforts or lack of them. And then after 3 years of doing that, so I learned about wine from the ground up, as it were. I came to London, worked with somebody developing a chain of stores in the mid 70s. Then I started my own business, which was the first 24/7 champagne delivery service in London. That really taught me about business. I then sold the business, and I got involved with the very, very beginnings of Majestic in a time before what most people considered was the beginning. And it was rather short-lived because the guy who started it was basically defrauding the bank, so we had to shop him to the bank and went into receivership. But during that process, I wrote the strategy for the company and did the first sort of development of the modern wine warehouse, and I felt during that time that my feeling with the problem with Majestic was it was trying to be too down market. So I came up with an idea, which I then took. Once Majestic been sold, I took to a guy called Chris Collins, who was one of the people who bid for Majestic, and said, I got a better idea. And that idea was a company called Bottlebooks, which we started in '82. And then that went on for 35 years. And then after that, before we sold it, I bought out the private client business and created a company called Crew. And Crew is really the main focus in wine trading today for me. And that now has offices in various parts of the world and is growing at a reasonably fast lick. But essentially what it's been doing for the last 9 years, which we've been doing, it is really sort of building a platform to try and sort of work our way iteratively through what we see as the sort of changing landscape for fine wine trading. So that's really brings up to date. I'm also involved in production a bit. With a partner, I have a winery in South Africa, and then I'm a partner of Nick's in Wine Owners since the beginning, and a couple of other things.
And so, when did the NFT world come on your radar?
Essentially, I think Marshall McLuhan said the medium is the message. And I think the NFT thing is seems to be rather focused on the message, and it's sort of, whereas my sense is that it's not the product, and I think that this is the critical. So we focus. My interest is very much from the product point of view. I think a lot of NFTs at the moment are kind of marketed, and they become a product in themselves rather than the underlying asset. Which is quite convenient because it gives people an opportunity to kind of come in over and above the existing fine wine sort of boring analog world and give it a few shiny, features that make it seem different. Whereas the reality is underlying, there is a bottle or a case of wine, just as analog as it ever was. And fundamentally, we've approached NFTs fundamentally from the provenance and the sort of smart contract capabilities to improve provenance, to improve custody, to improve traceability, and I think that's, to us, is where the real interest lies. I mean, the idea that, you know, champagne will sell for 2.5 million or whatever the hell it is, to me is noise. It's, you know, in the same way as, you know, you go on OpenSea and you'll see people with a lot of pixelated bottles, you know, done by a sommelier and, you know, tarted up by some pixel artist. You know, frankly, I don't see those in our future. And I think this is all a distraction. I think that, you know, I mean, it's all very interesting, but I think what's really interesting is the ability to, you know, create this immutable, decentralized world for participants throughout the whole of the value chain to have some kind of equal access and equal control.
But you did refer to, there was a bottle of champagne, Avenue Farr, 2017, that has become the world's most expensive champagne, 2.5 million. 2.5 million was paid in hard currency. So it did create value, although it, you know, it's confusing to people what that is, or to many people, but obviously not to everybody.
Well, what, you know, as Warren Buffett says, prices, or actually I think it was Benjamin Graham said, you know, price is what you pay, value is what you get. I think at the moment, there's a kind of FOMO character, I think, which is sort of slightly creating a smoke screen because it's all terribly exciting. But in the end, I mean, you do have to ask yourself, what are you getting more than the bottle of champagne which was there, you know, before? It's not at all clear to me that there's any real tangible added value. I think it's interesting, and, you know, but is it art? Or does it make the champagne better? You know, I think what a lot of the NFTs that we're seeing in wine will struggle with, because we've really chopped this wood. I mean, we've spent a lot of time with a lot of people who really understand this, and I don't. You know, we have a Slack channel devoted to this, and I don't understand a word on it. I really don't. I mean, all these guys are completely over my head. But what we've realized is when you actually get down to the real world stuff, you know, trying to append an NFT to a box of wine is bloody difficult.
So you did set up some kind of you set up a business around in this area.
We've got a whole, we've got a project on it. I mean, you know, which, you know, we've created a thing called Wine Trust, which is actually fundamentally where I think the heart of this all goes, which is self-custody, essentially. And the idea that once you buy your case or bottle of wine from a merchant, you should be able to immediately have that, you know, transferred digitally and physically to an account which is completely separated from the merchant. So you have full traceability and custody. So we've created a company, Wine Trust, to do that. We've spent a lot of time, and we have a whole division devoted to the development of the blockchain aspect of that, which we think is very much work in progress. And we've yet to see anybody who's made it any more than that. Because there are some fundamental problems, and, you know, which is, you know, the fundamental problem at the moment is that wine storage is rubbish. You know, wine, you know, the identification. I mean, you know, Nick understands this because this is the world of pain he and his team live in. You know, is to actually, you know, to be clear, you know, is that the case of wine I bought? Is that the case of Lafite? You know, was it in the condition that they said it was? You know, the fact of the matter is, this is run, the wine warehousing business is run by, you know, people who haven't really left the age of Dickens. You know, and in fact, the little bits of IT they've got is probably doing them more harm than good half the time. I think we're a long way away from having a slick physical back end that will fulfill the opportunity that is promised by the blockchain and NFTs.
So do you see storage and third-party storage or custodianship as being critical to the application of NFTs to you know, provenance and sort of proof of ownership and all that sort of stuff?
I think so, but, you know, for example, if I now sell you a case of Lafite with with an NFT, then you have an immutable contract, on the blockchain. That case of wine might be sitting in LCB or in Dartes in Bordeaux or wherever it was. And then Dartes has a relationship with a code, with an NFT code. And if you suddenly sell that to your colleague in the next desk, and you don't tell Dartes, who do they send the rental invoice to?
Exactly.
And look, I think it's one of the greatest challenge. Nick, you mentioned storage, and I would return the question upside down and ask: we effectively need the entire industry to be contributing data to that blockchain in order to have a proper, transparent traceability.
And yet, if you ask,
how do we suggest this takes place?
Well,
how do we get, because if you want an NFT, I can print an NFT tomorrow and slap it on a bottle, but that NFT carries absolutely no value unless it's been used and been tracked through different change of hands in the chain.
Well, it depends on the use case. Number one, I think it's quite clear, having spoken to warehouse men, that they see their job in managing the landing of wine and the identification of wine for outbounding at a future point in time as a big enough job in itself, and they really don't want to have these other responsibilities layered on top of that. It's not kind of what they do, right?
But it's not their responsibility. But ultimately, if the NFT gets supplied, gets assigned to the product at the warehouse, then we're basically saying the warehouse has an increased amount of work and having to verify the authenticity of that product, as opposed to having the producer and the previous players to actually certify and trade in that NFT. So ultimately, we want the producer, the winemaker, to say, I certify, I generate X amount of tokens, and that's how many liters I've made.
Yeah, I don't think it's the responsibility of the warehouse to generate the NFT. It's the responsibility of the producer to generate the NFT.
Yeah. But I mean, ideally.
But then what happens after that? So I bought a certain amount of cases of wine from a Burgundy producer called Reborso. So interesting producer. They've just been bought by Bouygues, who owns Montrose and own a French mobile network and construction company, and presumably a whole bunch of other things as well. They put NFT on the bottle. They put NFTs on their bottles, so that's exciting. I've now bought these bottles via two different retailers, merchants. Yes, I have absolutely no connection with those NFTs presently, and I have no idea why the producer put the NFTs on the bottle. Did he put it on the bottle because he thinks his wines are going to be worth an awful lot of money in the future and he's trying to manage fraud? Or did he put NFTs on the bottle because he sees NFTs as a utility for connecting himself more directly with his end user consumer, and he wants to provide a whole swathe of added benefits on top of the wine that you bought? Or does he want to partake in the downstream value of his wine if you decide to then trade it on? I have no idea
the challenge
what the
with that
answers are to
NFT.
any of these questions.
Currently, that NFT that you have on those bottles carries no value whatsoever, because I could scan the same NFT, I could scan the same key, I could say it's my key. Excuse me, but until the supply chain is able to record transactions of that NFT, then you can make as many copies as you want. The NFT will say, yes, it's a genuine wine. You just don't know that it's been issued, X number of times. So that's where I think there's a bit of a challenge in the overall supply chain, needing to actually be part of it in order to say, yes, there is a traceability, right? It's not just at the very end, here's the key attached to it. And we don't really know who the owner is because it's been purchased at random at a flea market or in a bottle shop. Until there's a recording of the change of hands event, that NFT carries no more value than strict marketing.
So what's the value chain for the participants within it, such as warehouses, in the tasks that fall upon them, if there are any tasks that fall upon them?
And look, the idea of blockchain and crypto at large is really to say, well, everyone who's contributing data or contributing value to the chain gets something back, right? So if you're a Bitcoin miner, you're not mining for free, you're getting Bitcoins as payments, right? So if a winemaker is taking the time to generate NFT based on the product that they've done, if a distributor, if the wholesale, if the retailer is taking the time to implement the technology and scan and implement that traceability, then they get something back by the chain. They get some value back, and it could be tokens of whatnot, but they need to get some value of that traceability. Currently, the only value we have is pure marketing and pure speculation.
Yeah.
Question, just to sort of steer away from the tech side of it, my question back to Simon is, okay, I think we're all identified that there is a pretty interesting use case for traceability of wine in the fine wine world, right? I'm buying a $5,000 bottle. I would kind of like to know that it's a genuine bottle. Fair enough. If we look at the broader wine market today, what do you think, Simon, is the percentage of that market which really could benefit the traceability of, like, what fraction of the market is a fine wine kind of a market that could use that NFT?
Well, there's two questions there. I think traceability is something that, I mean, in fact, one of the most established use cases for blockchain actually is the traceability of perishable goods in transport. And the reality is that, those smart contracts and blockchain, carry the kind of data which is incredibly helpful to the analog world of, fast retail and all the rest of it. So, traceability is something which is applicable to everything. And to me, this is the key. The key is that this is, again, what I started by saying, about the medium and the message and so on. The reality is people are characterizing NFTs as their sort of a product. It's actually, unfortunately, it's rather dull. It's really it has the potential to be a technology that can help to secure the whole integrity of the supply chain and of the value chain, and to also add certain features and so on, which help to possibly to shorten the value chain. Allow producers to communicate, and have more of a partnership with end users and all the rest of it. So, but at the moment, the fact of the matter is that the wine world is the wine as a product is extremely analog. And what the NFT phenomena has kind of thrown up and put into sharp relief is the extent to which it's pretty behind the times. Nick knows very well, because they've, Wine Owners is very much in the vanguard of developing the kind of software that brings warehouses out of the 18th century, sort of hopefully to a quick pass through the 19th and 20th, and have a fighting chance of being relevant in the 21st centuries. But that's kind of where we're at. And until we get the analog end of the wine business fit for purpose, the NFTs are really of very little utility. I think what they're helping to do is to articulate what is the opportunity going forward. And I think that is, and I think that future will come. But I suspect it's going to take a lot longer than some of the people who are trying to sell you a £2.5 million bottle of champagne thing.
And look, I mean, there's a big question from a fine wine perspective as to, how it is definitely applicable. If we want the technology to properly permeate through the industry, we effectively need to confirm that there is a need for the transparency and that traceability at large.
I think that's self. I think there's clearly an issue with provenance, and traceability. Is it actually a bottle of Lafite 61? Has it spent half its life freezing in a dock in Greenland and boiling in one in Singapore? Or has it sort of sat in the first warehouse it went to after having left the chateau? Those things are kind of important. And the more expensive that bottle of Lafite is, the more that kind of becomes kind of necessary.
Yeah.
So I think
can we estimate the number of bottles of wine being sold above $30 US? Then the amount is probably 1%.
Well, I mean, we've got
of the industry.
I don't know. I mean, people bandy about numbers. We all use them in our sort of presentations. Somewhere between $5 and $7 billion of value. Don't know how many bottles that is. So it's about 3%. The universe is probably, 10 times that. I don't know. There's, it's big, but in terms of, but it's very different to the bottom of that pyramid is a much bigger place. So it's a very small part of it.
Oh, 100%. And look, we actually saw recently in the news, and we talked about it. Was it Yellowtail who got some wine that was copied as well? And then the question, if we look at it the other way around, the question is really in the broader wine industry, the broader market, when the consumer purchases a bottle at $10, $15, how much do they care that it's actually a copy if it tastes close to being just about the same? So how much is that traceability really required from a fraud perspective?
No, I think the traceability at the mass market level, I mean, I remember having sold, lots of bottles to people like Tesco's and what have you. What really got them up at night was the idea that there might be another case of diethylene glycol in wine, where Sid and Doris Bonkers sort of sued them for, giving them, giving them a bottle of wine that could hurt them. So they're really, really interested about traceability. They want to they need, when they stand in front of the judge, they want to be able to say, yes, sir, we did, Your Honor, we did do the due diligence. Yes, we did have the controls in place. And I can tell you, having supplied own label to people like Tesco's and other supermarkets and Lidl and all the rest of it, is that, they're all over your production, all over your supply chain. They're all over the quality control. And so these tools, are, as they're being used in food and so on, they're coming to a supermarket near you, and the customer will never know there. But the whole point is the customer, it should, the whole point is never to make it that sort of thing a problem for the customer.
Mm-hmm.
The customer, the reason why they have confidence in you as a supermarket brand is because every time they grab something and they don't have to worry about it. And so anything that helps to materially increase the traceability and provenance of that.
And this is definitely not wine. This is supply chain at large, right? You're buying any kind of product off Amazon. How do you know it's not a cheap Chinese knockoff, right? Other than the vague trust that you have in Amazon that they'll refund you or return it if it doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
So ultimately, there's a broader supply chain, kind of a lack of transparency challenge.
So Amazon are highly incentivized to ensure that that their supply, is what it says it is, so that they don't have to have that conversation with me, the customer.
Yeah.
And that's why
100%.
None of this is and the point about these things, blockchain and NFTs, it's kind of boring. It should be boring. It's like it's the picks, the shovels, it's the wires and the cables, it's the plumbing, and it's not a fancy new thing that makes your wine taste better.
Yeah.
And look, we're also seeing on a sales and marketing front, we're also seeing a bunch of NFTs coming out in the world, wine specifically, around membership to specific clubs. We're looking at NFTs as tasting tokens type NFTs. How do you see sort of these applications shaping up versus the traceability itself?
Okay, there are two things here. Firstly, we talked a bit about the whole supply chain stuff, and there's, that's a lot. As I said, there's a lot of wood to chop there, and there's an awful lot of forest we've got to get through, right? the more interesting thing, I think, is the whole advent of Web 3.0, which is really the kind of the macro thing here. And I think that we're moving to a different world, and a different world where, you know, the previous, you know, the iteration of Web 2.0 is all about, you know, the few to the many. You know, it was the sort of the discrete information that, you know, I had as the seller that you didn't have as the buyer, and you had to kind of work out whether I was screwing you or not. You know, we're now with Web 3.0, there's the opportunity, which obviously everyone, you know, lots of participants will try and game, where there's an opportunity for everybody to have a level playing surface. And essentially we move to a world where, you know, I don't, as a wine merchant, sort of sell something to you and you buy from me. Essentially, I'm a facilitator in a very an increasingly transparent environment where, you know, what I am making out of you will be increasingly apparent to you. As it, and you know, it's quite easy to do a bit of Googling now and find out whether, you know, somebody's more expensive and all the rest of it. So, you know, in the end, we'll have to sort of run this cat and mouse game. I think there's an opportunity opening up where, you know, we can start to facilitate the process of making you a time poor wine consumer. You know, we can help you to find the things that you want, and we will charge a fee for that effectively. Which you'll be comfortable to pay, because it matches the value that we have actually added. You know, and the marketplace will kind of sort us out. But essentially, it's a, you know, as I said, it's a world where the consumer has much more control in the way they don't have in the Web 2.0 world, where, you know, if it's for free, you're the product, and all the rest, all those cliches that we know. And that we're constantly being abused by, you know, the apps that we use every day, as they, you know, they abuse our data and sell us things we don't want to buy at prices we shouldn't pay, and make us try and believe things that are nonsense and all the rest of it. You know, this is that Web 3.0, you know, has, and I, you know, I'm slightly skeptical, but I think that, you know, but I'm also optimistic. I think there's, you know, it's going to take. It's not a done deal, but I think that we have an opportunity to create an environment which is much more democratic.
Oh, yeah.
And I think
And
also that we have a share of value. And I think that when you look at smart contracts and all the other things, there's a much greater opportunity to actually share the benefits of the value that is added. And I think also the idea that your customer also adds value as well as you do. So it's not a kind of a seller gets all. You know, it's a very interesting opportunity. And, you know, I've always said that, you know, I've had private companies and I've had some outshared shareholders, but I've always thought, you know, the best shareholder I could ever have is my customer. Because essentially, if, you know, if he's got a share in my business and I inadvertently overcharge him, he'll get it dividended back. So in a way, you know, and as long as, and then, you know, and you know, and he would all, and they will also be comfortable that we're making enough money to incentivize us to do the work they don't want to do. You know, that's a really grown up conversation. And I think that's the kind of conversation I'm very keen to try instill into our business. But, you know, I do think it's going to take time. I think we can set out the principles of it, but the tools to do that are kind of, you know, they're tantalizingly close, but also practically quite far away.
And look, I think one aspect that we're trying to disseminate is really, it will take time. Technology will need to mature. We might lend ourselves with different chains, different NFTs, different application of the technology. The question today for the average winemaker, the question today for the average wine consumer is whether, or do I need to jump on this? Is that fucking groundbreaking right now? Or is that something that I'll just wait and the industry will adapt? Or
I think
there's the bit in the middle too, Seb, which you're conveniently skipping over in your sort of kind of play between the producer and the consumer, but perhaps inadvertently you've sort of hit upon something here as well. I'd be really interested to know what you think about this, Simon. I was speaking to a a chief executive of a global auction business recently, whose view is that in time, the current landscape and the connectivity that's going to take root between the producer and the consumer will make the retailer channel redundant.
Totally agree. Totally agree. I mean, my view is that, I mean, the reason I'm focusing on the secondary market is because, I mean, that's what Crew does. It's basically a marketplace of old wine, I mean, secondhand wine, basically. And that's because I think the primary market it should be a conversation between consumers and producers. And it's not clear to me, when I started Bibendum, frankly, we did two things which added value. We had expertise, and people, and then, and actually most wine didn't taste good. So you kind of did need somebody to help you. And we sorted out all the logistics. Well, the dirty truth was true then and is true today, is that actually the wine merchants are crap at logistics. So we didn't really earn our keep doing that. And the reality today is also that the expertise we had is now in your pocket, and it's not in. And the difference between our expertise and the one in your pocket, your smartphone, is that the smartphone's not biased. I mean, if I say you should buy Chateau Kiss Me Quick, it's, you have to ask yourself, is he trying to make a problem he's got mine, or is he really selling me something that I ought to be buying? So, with the world has changed dramatically since those days.
Have you seen, in your experience, any wine blockchain that seems to sort of like be gaining any sort of momentum at large, or?
I don't know. I mean, people talk a lot, but there's that. I mean, if you look on OpenSea, I mean, you can't. I mean, it's tumbleweed. So
yeah.
I think my guess is no, because the reality is that until you start moving boxes about because of in the aftermath of NFTs being minted, you won't find out how difficult this is. And we've done the kind of work to look at that, and we kind of go, this is beyond difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality is we don't have a back end to it yet. So I think this is, and I think that, we just have to, I think the best thing the wine trade can do is I think that, what we're focused on really is is the new relationship that we need to start to evolve between in the value chain of wine. And I think there's a massive existential crisis that needs to be understood in the middle, in the intermediary part. At the end, there are only two parts of the value chain that really have any long-term enduring credibility, and that's the producer and the consumer. Everything in the end, everything in the middle either shouldn't be there, or it needs to facilitate something that the two other ends don't want to do or can't. And I think that re-examination is a process which is what we should be focusing on. And any given sort of shiny new toy that comes up, we ought to resist the temptation to turn it into a solution, because it's basically putting a bloody great big band-aid over something that just doesn't work, to try and pretend that somehow it's now all easy. Mm-hmm. And you can buy your NFT from Reborso or whoever, and suddenly you've got a value-added product. But as Nick says, he can't even find. He's never been even given a key to the damn thing. So
yeah, I mean, I know what I want to see happen. I am interested in that relationship with the producer. I am interested in him inviting me round for a tasting when I pulled 6 corks out of the bottle, and that's been up, my NFT status has been updated accordingly, for example.
Yes.
But I think it, I think the question about the distribution channels in the middle and how they add value is a very interesting and pertinent one. And maybe it's going to take maybe it's going to take 5 or 10 plus years to play out. But where does that leave someone like Crew?
I think so. I think exactly. And I think the future where a producer has a residual interest in his product, and has a connected relationship which can evolve over time, that's basically facilitated by a smart contract, I think is extremely interesting. And and I think it absolutely does, in the end, it really, I mean, it will decimate a lot of the middlemen, traditional middlemen like ourselves. And I think it's so we have to, we have to be very agile, because and we need to understand, how this world's going to unravel, and we need to make sure that, that we have a place there. I think that within fine wine, I mean, as I've said to you before, Nick, I mean, the reality, there is some really interesting structural stuff, which is kind of, gives some kind of credence to the idea there's a future for sort of intermediaries, and that is that, there is real scarcity. The reality is that we have, in the 50 years I've been in the wine trade, that, the fact of the matter is, the big difference today from when I started is the rest of the world got rich, but Chateau Margaux doesn't make any more wine. And price is the intersection of supply and demand. So it's not surprising that prices go up, but it's not surprising that you can't get a bottle of Le Pen, even if you want to pay the whatever it is, for it. So actually scarcity is a big thing. In like a lot of collectibles, that, there is a whole world of trying to help curate that and to aggregate that and to, and a lot of that, and things like NFTs and all the rest and blockchain and so on will help facilitate that in the future. But I think fundamentally, the world is moving to a much more sort of direct marketplace between producers and consumers of whatever, and wine is going to be no exception. And, to us to sort of, to produce, like we all do in the fine wine trade, Taittinger will come out with a new vintage of Comte Champagne. We'll all come out at 8 o'clock on Monday morning with the same wine at the same price, 15% more expensive than Hatch Mansfield sold it, wherever it is that, I can't remember who's the merchant that, sold it to us for. And, but what value do we really add here?
And look, I would suggest you're 100% correct when you say that the relationship between the producer and the consumer is where technology is actually going to change things massively. It is not just wine specific, it is supply chain at large, food and beverages, really, even more than that. I've started using in the number of conversation, instead of talking about direct to consumers, which really puts the onus on the producer to do a whole lot of work to get to consumers. I've started talking about direct from producers, because I think the market moving forward, that market of traceability will be created by the consumer who actually wants to get some of that transparency. Not every consumer cares, but there is a number of consumers who would prefer to buy a bottle of wine because it's been fair traded, because it's carbon neutral, because it can be traced through the chain, as opposed to saying to the producer, yeah, you need to have an NFT on your bottle. We need the consumers to increasingly demand that for the industry to change and adapt. So a consumer would buy a bottle at Tesco more than another one because it has had an NFT attached to it and can be traced. So direct from producer, I think, is where things are at.
I want to go back to the sale of the champagne, because we talked a lot about the supply chain, which is great. But one of the things I thought was interesting about this type of use of NFT is that it's essentially art. Laurie, what is this relationship? So this is the board. It's a Bored Ape Mutant, and it's an NFT, and it's now art. I mean, NFT art sells for millions of euros, and it's somehow fusing wine with art. What is that relationship? How is that an interesting thing going forward?
I think it has potential. I think it's still, I mean, I don't want to attract like bored apes people like onto me, but it's still a bit like gimmicky at this level too, right? Like it's really like very much like a FOMO approach. I do think there is, like, it's interesting how the two are combined, and how I'm not thinking it's democratizing the wine, but what I find fascinating, I look in a couple of like NFTs and wine, and it's always using like the coolest graffiti artist in New York to sell the most traditional, like, like red wine bottle, like of an expensive vintage. So bringing the art, or the cool kids artist doing the art, I think it's like this kind of like possibility to reinvent a bit like the wine industry or how it presents itself. And I think that's why it can also come across like so gimmicky. It's like, okay, are we, again, no offense to a bottle of champagne, but are we putting like, what is the expression in English? Like lipstick on a pig, like it's just like, are we masking something? So I mean, that's a bit that worry sometimes when the NFT goes overtly marketing. Are you hiding something else? Or just like something, you're just setting the air? NFT is also so hard to understand because there's so much, I mean, the way actually Simon explained it, I get it way better now, but like, in the zeitgeist, like it's very like, oh, it's cool, it's trendy, but it's also, is it attached to Bitcoin? Like, oh, is it like, like, so it's just like, that's just interesting to me how they just combine art to make it a different product altogether. And what is the one over the other? Like at the end of the day, with the 2.5 million, I know we can't separate it, but is it 2.2 million for the ape and 300K for the wine, or vice versa? Like, like it's just, I'm wondering if the buyer is dividing the value as well, and what is actually purchasing. Is it the wine at the end of the day? In that particular case, I don't think so. But
you won't be surprised now I've got an opinion about this. My view is that what's happening here is that, a lot of these people getting rich in the last 50 years is that what the prices have been bid up through scarcity. And wine has joined the ranks of those, those sort of those indicators of status. But there's no correlation between that and an understanding of the intrinsic values of the wine. So actually, they need other things which make it easier for them to.
Yeah.
So actually, if you've got a Jay-Z bottle, I presume he was one of the ones who did one. Or you've got a Damien Hirst, or whatever, or you've just got some Bored Ape pixelated thingy. You can basically focus on something where you feel more comfortable. I've got this rare thing that's cost 2.5 million. That's all you need to know. And the thing that we need to understand about fine wine for people who are buying it because it's expensive is it has enormously unique utility in that, what you can do is when your friends come around, you can take this 10,000 million pound bottle of wine and you can pull the cork and pour it into glasses. And without saying anything, what you've told your friends you can do is you can pour that amount of money out forever.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas you can resell the Picasso, you can lease the Ferrari, and all the rest of it. So the utility of and when wine gets to a certain level of price, it's often, it needs those sort of things, because actually it's not about nobody gives a toss about the terroir and the struggling ouvrier in his Shay and all that. What they're interested in is what it says about them. And that is it's interesting from a commercial point of view, but it's potentially, there's a cost, because if you detach the interest in the product from its intrinsic characteristics, eventually, it'll be an emperor with no clothes.
And I think Simon made a point earlier on as well that the NFT, the blockchain, these are really just technologies, not the product.
No, they're not.
And ultimately, the champagne bottle coming in with an NFT attached. Look, there's plenty of hype around NFT at the moment, so it might have helped in selling that bottle for such an exorbitant price, right? But ultimately, the technology is not what we should be selling. The technology should be supporting a need in the industry far more than just, oh yeah, here's an NFT. The challenge, David, to come back onto the world of art, is that there's a lot of chains, NFT chains in the world of art, who are starting to really trace and also share future value with the artist.
Sure. That's interesting.
So in this case here, which could be quite interesting, is that this $2.5 million bottle of wine that was sold, how much is the winemaker getting off that transaction? Right now, it's absolutely zero. The winemaker, the producers are getting jack shit out of the future value of something that they've poured their sweat and tears in, not literally. And that's where I think ultimately right now the concept of NFT is broadly really just hype, but the underlying technology, as many have identified, is deeply fascinating and could have a true application to the world of wine. Again, the consumer needs to create that market. The consumer needs to say, actually, you know what? There's only 100 of those NFTs or 100 of those bottles left. I'm prepared to pay 50 grand, and there's a transparent public chain available for it.
But also, if you as a producer, if your wine, sells for 1,000, eventually in the secondary market over time, after 10 years, sells at, you sold it for 100 and it sells for 1,000 or something. You increasingly think, God, I better put my prices up because too many people are making money out of me. Whereas actually, if you had a residual interest over time, then you might be incentivized to make the product, your wine, attractive at the initial release price. Because suddenly, your interest is becoming aligned with the marketplace and vice versa. Yeah. And that creates a much more, and again, this kind of, you have a marketplace with time that allows for the proper appropriation,
allocation
of value, exactly. Yeah. And you share risk. So if this is such a great bottle of wine, yeah. Well, then let's all share in that outcome, whatever it might be, whether it might be disappointing or terribly exciting.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I noted. That's to me very exciting. This idea of royalty. I know it's not the proper term, but like the idea of it stays through the same. Like, and that goes back a bit to what you were saying. Then maintaining that, like the integrity of the code all the way throughout. Like you have winners all the way if it manages to go back all the way to the producer. Like if people are incentivized, transparency is there, and you should encourage, like you mentioned, Simon, like a better product, because so that's to me, like literally it was like, I'm glad we're touching on that, because I'm like, I wanted to talk about that, like this idea of royalty of wine built in, especially for fine wine. I think that's to me also something I'm really curious on how it's going to evolve and how it's going to be also adopted. I'm speaking from a designer point of view. Some very famous graphic designers, brand designers, they actually get paid very little on the onset, but they right away negotiate a royalty. Is like, I'm only going to charge 30% than what I would charge, but then every bottle of that rum that I design, I'll get royalty.
100%.
Yeah. So, but I gotta tell you, like it's not well yet received, or like so it's just like, it's also like the technology needs to be there, but I'm also curious how like the market and all the
journey.
Exactly.
We need to shift mentalities completely. We need to change mentalities. And it's an approach which Troly has taken pretty much since day one. We connect to a number of different sales channels, and we're trying really hard not to have the producers to pay to be on that sales channel. Right? We really want the producers to pay when there is a sale by the sales channel. And so there's no warehousing, there's nothing in the middle. We really need for everyone to benefit in the chain when there is a sale. When the consumer says, actually, yes, I'm buying, which basically means that everyone in the chain is incentivized for really trying to make the product and market the product and present the product in a way that's going to fetch the absolute best value, given everyone benefits in the chain. And look, it's a fascinating topic.
And I guess, I guess this whole conversation does beg the question, what is the market? Yeah, what are the mechanisms? And if the producer is aligned with the consumer in taking a percentage of downstream value, who else currently within the chain isn't going to get part of the downstream value anymore?
I think ultimately it's really all about value add. And the challenge is there are players today in the chain who will basically say, okay, I'm going to buy this product, I'm going to double the value and sell it. And they don't even hold the product, they just take title of the product, they don't do any work as part of it. And so if there's no true value being added, then these people will really just be removed from the chain completely.
They
Right?
will.
But at the same time, any value add is going to remain. And if we look at Oushinery and Laurie and the value of a quality label and quality imagery, I think it's clear that if the wineries are presenting something fairly schmick and fairly well put together, it's clear that you're going to get a better value than, you know, a $2.99 kind of a label. But right now, there is no incentive for Laurie to do an absolutely outstanding job, because all Oushinery is getting is an upfront payment. And that's where ultimately, if you were able to prove that a good label sells 10, 15, 20% better, then there's value being added, and these players will remain. And look, just to round up, I think there is a huge applicability into fine wine, correct. There is, I think, a huge applicability to very, very small production wines, the below 5,000 kind of cases, which is 90, 94, 95% of producers, because these guys, when consumers discover them, they want to retain a relationship. The challenge is going to be in the middle. How are these guys kind of moving? Are they going to move towards more direct, or is the chain going to try and add value to the product?
Jonathan, do you want to jump in here? You've been very quiet. Do you have any thoughts, questions?
He's just worried that his kid's going to be drinking very soon.
Yeah. No, and usually quiet. No, it's been a fascinating discussion, and I think a lot of other people were asking questions that I was interested in. I do find it a novel, like the novel concept of the downstream value. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think that's how it can also work with football clubs. Like when players get traded, the original feeder clubs get a percent of the downstream, a cut of the downstream transaction as well. So, I mean, there are examples. There are other examples out there of where somebody who creates to producing a great product benefits down the line. I think the football clubs, obviously, or football obviously has a built-in control mechanism. The people who are worth a lot are put up on the television screen, so you know when a trade happened, and you can go and recoup that money that you're owed. It's a little bit more difficult to track when that bottle got sold and who then needs to feed it back up. But that's again where the blockchain can help when there's a critical mass passing through those gates. I think from also coming from our work in events, I think, you know, it's interesting to also contemplate, you know, whether things where else can be used outside of the monetary side, but also on the experiential and gamification, even that, you know, you're potentially able to use this to, you know, quote unquote program your wine, so that when you go places and scan it, then, you know, it's not just that one app that's able to access information on the wine and pull out information, but, you know, potentially it's information that's available very easily for others to use as well, and create really interesting experiences. I don't know if you see any of that, like any other use cases in fine wine besides just trying to associate value with the wine or ownership. Are there other things that you see in fine wine, or as gamification something that's more for the commercial end of the spectrum?
Are you asking me, or?
Yeah. Yes.
I think that fundamentally the thing that, you know, the kind of the terra firma here is the facilitation, you know, the kind of boring stuff. Mm-hmm. But over and above that, in a much more sort of added value area, I think, you know, the facilitation implies a very different kind of relationship, and therefore there's a lot of talk now about community. You know, and I think community is a very different way of looking at the relationship people have, you know, from people who produce things and people who consume them, you know, in its broader sense. And I think the community, it's, you know, becomes the kind of the basis on which you build, you know, stronger, more enduring relationships. It's about trust. It's about, you know, the hive mind. It's about it's actually also, I think it can go as far as, creating a community around a producer that not only has, maybe facilitated by blockchain and NFTs, has a much sort of richer, more long-term relationship with the case of wine they bought, but actually it may also facilitate them financing the producer. And it may be that they almost become, sort of unformally aggregated ecosystems. So he doesn't have to. So the farmer doesn't have to be beaten up by the bank, and also he doesn't have to. And actually, if he's got, if he's selling 5,000 cases and he's got 5,000 customers, he doesn't have to speculate about his production. So it's actually much more cost effective. He actually knows how many cases he's going to sell. He knows when he's going to sell them. He knows when the money's going to come in. And it may be the money's already coming in terms of a kind of a subscription. So it facilitates a very different kind of relationship where, the blurring between the two ends of the value chain and the integration of the two, the polarization of the two, creates a much richer experience all round. So I think we need, and there's a lot of, and actually, when it comes to new product development, it comes to sort of expansion of a producer or their brands and so on, that intimate conversation they have with their customers takes a lot of risk out of it. And also, it empowers, people like Laurie to actually, they always say there's no such thing as a bad design, there's just a bad brief. And the problem is, one of the reasons that briefs are so rubbish is because it's extremely difficult to work out what I want as a producer and also what my customer wants. And I kind of want what my customer will pay most for is really what I want to say as a producer. But I can't really, I've got no reliable conversation with my customer to actually find out what that is. And so that there's a much richer sort of community relationship that actually empowers the process to get better product, more appropriate, better market fit, with more sort of certainty of being an enduring value to all participants, and a much richer whereas too often you leave a wine shop or the checkout online with something you don't really know if it's what you wanted, and you don't know whether you bought the right price, and when you open it you're not really sure what you've and you don't really know anything about it, and it's a slightly unsatisfactory experience. And so the future on that added value side is enormously interesting. But I think the fundamental thing we've got to do is to get the nuts and bolts right. And I think the sort of thing that Nick does, in the building warehouse software and tools for traders and so on, which those traders could just as well have their seats be sat in by producers and over time, that, or a mixture of the two, all the rest of it. The fact is you're building the tools by which we can better network this ecosystem.
And coming from technologists, I think getting the nuts and bolts right is the easy bit. The hard bit is really to get broad, wide adoption from an industry which is hugely fragmented. Again, wine, but also food and beverages at large is massively fragmented. And getting the actual chain, getting the actual underlying technology, that's actually a piece of cake. It's actually really easy in the scheme of trying to broadly roll that out.
I would really take issue with that. I think the fundamental problem we've had ever since I got into the wine trade, and certainly for centuries before it, is that we've never taken the back end seriously. And that's why we've never had the front end that we needed. And the fact is, all the things you're talking about are incredibly interesting and complicated. But the fact of the matter is, the basic nuts and bolts of this business are so bad. And one of the reasons is that nobody in the trade is interested.
Correct. But the whole point is that when you're talking about back end and front end, this is a product contributing to the chain. And ultimately, the chain needs to be contributed to by different products. So there needs to be a product for warehousing. There needs to be a product for retail. There's likely to be multiple products all contributing to a transparent chain. right? And so the actual underlying blockchain style technology underneath the thing to actually record transactions and certify traceability, that piece is easy.
It's not easy.
The challenge is to get products that people and companies and real people use every day, products to contribute to that chain and create transactions on that chain.
When you say product, you're talking about things like, you know,
An app.
ERP systems, or you're talking about content. Yeah.
Correct.
No, that's what we're saying. Yeah. Okay. I mean, the answer is you never
exist.
You never computerize a moving target. The fact of the matter is, no one's done the joined up thinking and making the basic simple process of moving a case of wine from the producer's door to the consumer's door, and all the bits in between. Nobody's got that done.
Correct. And so the creation of the chain is easy. The challenge is really to get not one front end and back end, but 500 across the chain, across the world, to really contribute to that one chain. Otherwise, the risk is that we're going to end up having different chains with different apps with different values, and that's just going to be hype again. So yeah, look, we could go on for hours, I think.
Well, I think on that note, we should wrap it up. I'd like to thank Simon for spending the time with us, diving into NFTs. It's really been an interesting conversation. And of course, I'd like to thank our insiders, Nick, Laurie, Seb, and Jonathan. We will see you all sometime again this summer, and then with a regular scheduled podcast coming starting in September. Thanks again, and see you in a few weeks.
Thanks again, Simon. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Simon.
Thanks.